Hello everyone. I've never really made a video like this before, but I've been thinking about Deltarune. I wanted to put some of my thoughts down in writing, specifically some thoughts on everybody's favorite Dr. W.D. Gaster. I figured maybe this was worth making into a YouTube video just so I have something to look back on in case something I say turns out to be accurate to the rest of the game. But before I get into this, I want to say this isn't some crazy, well-researched prediction for how the rest of the game is going to play out. Most of the script was written on my phone in between bouts of pretending to do my job. I've also tried to avoid watching any other Deltarune analysis videos between then and now, because I'm afraid if I do, I'll just end up accidentally stealing someone else's ideas. That being said, I will put links in the description to some videos that made me want to make my own video. Also, I'm going to assume that you've played Undertale and the first 4 chapters of Deltarune, and that you know who Dr. W.D. Gaster is. If you haven't played those games, this video won't make any sense and you'll get spoiled. Go play them and come back. Deltarune is on sale right now. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Doctor. First of all, I think there's some ambiguity with the relationship between Gaster and Friend. I think given that Friend's file names are in line with all of the other Gaster-related files, Gaster created Friend or is at least working with Friend. So even if it was specifically Friend that made Spanton go crazy, Gaster had some part in it also. The Knight seems more involved with specifically giving people shadow crystals, but Gaster/Friend and the Knight seem aligned in the cause of creating secret bosses and telling them about freedom and whatnot. Simultaneously, however, Gaster seems to be helping you, the player. He gives you a vessel, or at least tries to. When you die, he lets you reload your save file. He seemingly creates those save files in the first place. If you die to the Knight in Chapter 3 right before its final attack, he gets visibly excited about how close you came. When you fail to receive any marks on the PlayStation version, he remarks on it with the same bemused tone of a biologist clocking in at the lab and discovering that rat number 2 has turned the color of a blueberry smoothie. So why does Gaster seem like he's playing both sides? Because this is all just a big experiment. Gaster created Deltarune as a test to see if people can defy a prophecy, the one that he wrote. After all, this is his Deltarune. So, here's the setup. Some random teenager is told they have a predestined role to fulfill. At first, they react with outright dismissal and non-belief. Later, though, when it starts coming true, they begin to believe and they feel excited about the prospect of being part of something greater. But later still, horror sets in when they realize what the logical conclusion to that destiny would be, and so there arises an internal conflict. She has to conclude either that the prophecy is false, and that all the stuff that already came true was just a highly improbable coincidence, or that it really is true, and she's doomed. I wouldn't know what to believe either. In fact, I think something similar may have happened to Chris before the events of Chapter 1. Presumably, being a regular attendee at church, Chris would have already known the prophecy as framed by the religion of Hometown. I think it's probable that something analogous to December's disappearance and or how they became possessed by you was also foretold in the prophecy, and so now Chris, also presumably knowing the ending of the prophecy, is unsure how much of a fairy tale it really is. So Gaster's experiment has to do with belief, specifically whether belief or non-belief in predictions of the future can make them come true or not true. He's set up all the pieces, he controls the narrative, he's already told the residents of Hometown how the story ends. The test, then, is to see if they can defy that ending, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's probably going to come true. Now, of course, we must address the elephant in the room. How does the weird route fit into all of this? I've seen some people say that the weird route is just following the original prophecy, but that doesn't really make sense to me, at least not in that way. It would make more sense for following the prophecy to be the path of least resistance, as opposed to being so out of the way that it's almost impossible to stumble upon it by accident. Defying the prophecy should be the thing that takes more effort. in the same way that you have to actively choose to act instead of fight. In this case, then, the normal route is you defying the prophecy through our naive hope, as Rouse calls it. Susie's gonna do some cool shit and it'll be awesome. The weird route is the player saying, screw you, Doc, I'm gonna defy your prophecy using exclusive tips and tricks and finding you under the truck, and then Noelle's gonna jump out of the TV and cry hyper-realistic blood. That being said, I do think it's possible that the end of the weird route will somehow soft-lock you out of Chapter 7. You know how in Morrowind, if you kill a story-relevant NPC, you get a pop-up message to either reload your save or persist in this doomed world? It's basically what I'm imagining. An important character is rendered unable to contribute to the story. Maybe that's already happened with Birdley. Now, this is still a deviation from the intended path, but it preserves the one ending to the game because the weird route just doesn't have an ending. I'm just imagining you wander around hometown or wherever, never finding the dialogue that actually progresses the story. You're soft-locked. Now, according to Gerson's recap of Lord of the Hammer, which we know is based on the prophecy and therefore Deltarune itself, the story stops after Chapter 6. I believe that this means that defying the prophecy is what unlocks Chapter 7. I know I just said the weird route also stops after Chapter 6, but that's not because the weird route is the prophecy. Rather, the weird route is still a deviation from the prophecy, but it is such a violent and harmful one that the result ends up being just as harmful as the actual ending of the prophecy. A classic case of trying to prevent a tragedy, but in the process of doing so, creating a different, possibly even worse tragedy. So, but wait, if Dr. Gaster seems to be rooting for our success, then why does he let the weird route happen? Because his primary goal is simply to see how both the player and the characters in the story react to being told about an unalterable fate. He's not on one side or the other, he's just conducting an experiment. Does that make him evil? Maybe. Maybe we'll have some big fight at the end where everyone says fuck you for putting us in this giant rat maze. I don't know. There's still a lot of unknowns. Of course, all of this discussion so far has been in the context of diegetic, in-universe explanations. Even if Dr. Gaster wrote The Legend of Deltarune, Dr. Gaster also isn't a real person. Yes, shocking, I know. This is a story within a story, and that story is being written by a real person. A real person who wants to communicate certain themes and ideas. So I wanted to close out this whole thing with my thoughts on what this means for the story that Toby Fox wants to tell. Obviously, there's a lot you could say about repeated mentions of free will and how different characters react to being told they have free will, and how hoping against hope is one of the most powerful things that you can do. But another part of it, I think, is the emphasis on the fact that the story's going to end, and it seems like it's going to be our job to figure out a way to go beyond and create a better ending. Not for there to be no ending, like Susie said that one time, because then it's like a good place situation where living happily forever and never dying actually ends up sucking a lot. A story needs closure eventually. So, I think the intended message of the story overall is about taking a story that someone else wrote and not being afraid to write your own ending to it. There's no such thing as a story that's too precious to have someone else try putting their own spin on it. I speak here not just of literal stories, books, movies, whatever, but also of narratives constructed from reality. Other people will always be trying to write the ending to your story. You have to remember that you hold the white pen of your own life and livelihood. No doctor or wizard or anyone can tell you how your life is going to end. That's what I believe the message is. Or at least one of the many messages of the game. Going back to the literal meaning of stories, I do also think it's about not being afraid to express your creativity, even if it's just derivative of other existing works. All art is derivative, ultimately. There's no escaping that. So you might as well start honing your skills with fan fiction before you move up to inspired by fiction. Honestly, there's something of a Dunning-Kruger effect on the axes of how worried you are that your work is a ripoff and how likely it is that your work is actually a ripoff. And even if you do make mistakes and subpar output, it's all part of the learning process. Greatness doesn't happen overnight, so keep working. Okay, thanks for watching. I've never made a video like this before, so I hope you guys like it. If I have anything else to say, it'll be in the description or the pinned comment on the video. I hope you all enjoyed your applicable December holidays, and I will see you all in 2026 when Chapter 5 drops and the Earth explodes. Goodbye.